Chernobyl disaster had an immediate impact in large clouds of radiation and billowing pillars of smoke, the long-lasting impacts on Russian society, on other European nations, and on the environment are the true legacy of Chernobyl. Chernobyl highlights the great danger presented by scientific exploration. The Chernobyl reactor was located in the Soviet-controlled area of Ukraine. Though it was in a largely unpopulated area of Ukraine, the reactor was 3 miles from the town of Pripyat, which had a population of about 49,000 people. On the night of April 25, 1986, the crew of Reactor 4 ran a standard test of turbines in the reactor. This test determined how long the turbines would spin and provide power to the reactor in the event of a main power failure. This test had been performed many times before, but this time was different. This time, it went terribly wrong. The test caused a power surge to the reactor core. The crew was able to shut off the reactor, but it left the core in an extremely unstable condition. Cooling water and hot fuel generated a great amount of steam, and pressure in the reactor built up quickly, so that in the early morning of April 26th, 2 explosions occurred. These explosions threw dangerous fission products into the atmosphere and killed 2 workers in an instant. These 2 workers could be considered lucky because 28 other workers and firemen died long, painful deaths after being exposed to around 2,000 millisieverts of radiation. To put this into perspective, American workers today are only permitted exposure to about 50 millisieverts of radiation every year. Any more than this is considered detrimental to that worker's health. Being near to Chernobyl for one day after the accident was the equivalent of working for 40 years in a nuclear power plant. The immediate impact of this disaster was these 30 deaths and the spreading of dangerous iodine-101 and caesium-137 to places as far away as Scandinavia. The town of Pripyat was evacuated and it has been uninhabited for the 30 years since. Today, Pripyat is home only to feral dogs, thrill seekers, and military patrols. This was only the beginning of a disaster that stretched over the decades after its occurrence. It is estimated that the thyroid cancer rate for 1986 to 1997 was 10 times greater than the pre-accident level among Ukrainian patients under 15 years old. Other children are horribly disfigured, and the infant mortality rate is 300% higher in Belarus, near the accident site, than in the rest of Europe.
It's the only movement he has.
Is it painful?
А не болит, когда ты двигаешь? Нет. И не болит, если ты садишься?
Нет.
А как ты вот двигаешься? Вот так и передвигаешься, а в школу?
А в школу меня носят
Кем ты хочешь быть?
врачом.
Let's be a doctor. Why? А почему?
Чтобы лечить детей.
Several months later, a cleanup was initiated where liquidators moved contaminated materials into the reactor and began construction on a large coffin to surround the reactor core. Sergei, a Chernobyl liquidator, was interviewed in 2008. The interviewer asks, "You were in the zone for over 1 month. Was the short time frame due to your accumulated radiation exposure, or was it planned to be that length when you first arrived?" Sergei replies, "Yes, it was because I had accumulated the sacred number, 25 roentgens. In reality, my dose was at least twice higher, according to my estimates. During my time in the zone, we did not have individual dosimeters whatsoever. The dose was calculated based on the average working irradiation measurements, which was 6 to 8 checkpoints on the perimeter and midsection of the operational field, surface, etc. Based on the level, the squad leaders such as myself determined the average time of work considering daily doses of 2.5 roentgens, not higher, per person." The interviewer then asks, "How many of your friends that served as liquidators with you have become sick due to radiation exposure?" To which Sergei responds, "At least 3 of my fellow liquidators got health problems right there while being involved in the station. I know of several deaths among liquidators whom I served with, but this is a very sad, emotional part for me, so forgive me if I choose not to go into details." The considerable danger that Sergei and other liquidators were put through was considered an outrage by Americans who were already embroiled in the Cold War. These anti-Soviet feelings were amplified after it took Mikhail Gorbachev 18 days before he issued a statement regarding the Chernobyl disasters. He only did so after Sweden demanded information on why their air had been filled with radioactive material. In the following speech, Gorbachev addresses the USSR. "Good evening, comrades. As you all know, a misfortune has befallen us. The accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. It has painfully affected Soviet people and caused the anxiety of the international public. For the very first time, we've encountered in reality such a sinister force as nuclear energy that has escaped control." Gorbachev goes on to say that various attempts are being made to bring the matter under control, but he is vague in his description of these efforts, choosing to say, quote, All work is being conducted on a round-the-clock basis. The scientific, technical, and economic potential of the entire country has been put to use. This vagueness of speech further strained American relations with Russia. On April 28, 1986, the New York Times released an article that said, quote, Gorbachev's phrasing suggested that the problem had not been brought under full control at the nuclear plant, which the Soviet announcement identified as Chernobyl Station. The Soviet mishandling not only aggravated relations with America, but also relations with other European countries. British Foreign Secretary Geoffrey Howe said, quote, There is a deep concern at the Soviet Union's failure to give early warning of this. It is a serious lapse in European good neighborliness. Margaret Thatcher later released a statement that said, quote, The Soviet failure to alert European nations to the radioactive cloud moving towards them raises questions about Moscow's new open policy. West German Foreign Minister Hans-Dietrich Genscher called on the Soviets to decommission nuclear reactors until more was known about the Chernobyl accident, and the European Community Commissioner in charge of nuclear safety, Stanley Clinton Davis, accused the Soviet Union of breaking international law for not disclosing the accident earlier. These statements demonstrate a previously unseen political tension in Europe that brought nuclear power to the forefront of political debate. The pressures from Sweden, Denmark, and other countries resulted in new safety regulations and inspections for nuclear reactors throughout Europe. Though nuclear power is now safer than ever and Cold War aggression has died away, the environmental impacts of Chernobyl are more evident today than ever before. Biologists have discovered an alarming number of defects and abnormalities among the populations of animals in the Chernobyl zone.
It's a perfect area for biological studies because we see a diversity of plants and animals. It's one of the hotter areas in the Chernobyl zone, and so from our previous work we know that this level of chronic exposure is above that most species will tolerate.
Most environmentalists think only of mutations and abnormalities when they think of Chernobyl. But an oft-overlooked benefit of the Chernobyl disaster was that it created a veritable nature reserve that has remained untouched by people for 30 years. The area began as a city overgrown by a forest, but by 2015 this city has become the forest. Buildings are engulfed by trees, and sidewalks are obscured by shrubbery. Wolves, elk, boar, and other species now call this reserve their home. Endangered species like Przewalski's horse and the European bison have been introduced to the area and are flourishing. The wolf population is estimated to be about 7 times greater than 30 years ago. As terrible as it may seem to present the idea that Chernobyl may have benefited the global population, the benefits of Chernobyl far outweigh the losses. Though there was a small number of casualties, as well as increased birth defects and throat cancer in the local population, the radioactive materials released into the atmosphere have long since dissipated, leaving the world only with greater awareness of nuclear safety, providing millions of people involved in nuclear power with more guidelines and protocols to follow, and giving hundreds of animals, some endangered, a safe haven from the increasingly industrial world. Too frequently is Chernobyl dismissed as a scientific failure, or lumped together with other disasters like tornadoes, hurricanes, or economic recessions, when Chernobyl is like none of these disasters, because there is no silver lining in a tornado or a hurricane, only pain and suffering. Chernobyl, as previously mentioned, had several silver linings, and the good far outweighs the bad. For this reason, Chernobyl demonstrates the inherent dangers of scientific exploration, but also that even in so-called scientific failure, mankind can be benefited just as much as a scientific breakthrough.